What kind of doors would re-signing Chris Godwin open up? That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. An interesting pairing from Daniel Jeremiah, a combine preview, and some coaching changes for the Buccaneers. All of that is coming up in a little bit. But let's start with a great question that I got over at the Locked On Bucs account on Twitter from Anand. So Anand reached out into the DMs and he said, assuming we lock up Godwin at the same annual salary as Mike at $23 million a year, does it make sense to you to trade 2 firsts and then some for Myles Garrett? Or do we have enough cap space to target some unrestricted free agents like Chase Young and Dre Greenlaw? Would that make more sense? This could allow us to target your guy Benjamin Morrison in the first, then stack up on edge and linebacker depth in later rounds without giving up valuable draft capital. So I love this question, and I love it because of something that I always talk about in draft season. It's about the collective, not the individual picks. So when you hear me talking about the draft, I always talk about it's not about specifically the first round or specifically the second round. It's about what does the entire draft class look like. Anand is taking this a step further, talking about the collective between free agency and the NFL draft. So what would be the best option in this scenario? If the Bucs lock up Godwin, they would still need to bring back Levante and Bredesen. But this does open the door to unload that first round pick this year and potentially next year if need be in order to get Myles Garrett. See, with those 3 back in the fold, you are legitimately a few defensive pieces away from contending for a championship, and there's no question that Myles Garrett gets you awfully close to that goal. I think that although Jason Light covets draft picks, a move like this is one where he'd be willing to part with his first this year in order to make that mega deal. Garrett is a franchise-changing asset that immediately makes your defense exponentially better. Now, of course, you could also say that Jason could keep his first rounder and probably unload a second for Trey Hendrickson should the Bengals make him available, which is even more intriguing. In that scenario, you still have your first rounder to use on a position like corner, like linebacker, but you still get a massive, massive upgrade at that edge spot. As far as the money is concerned, I'm not going to worry about it too much. If the Bucs want to make this kind of deal, they're going to figure out how to make the money work. I mentioned on an episode last week that, playing with over the caps salary tool, I restructured a few guys, made a few cuts, and I had the Bucs up at $40 million in cap space in the blink of an eye. And that was when their estimated cap was a little over $2 million. Now it's estimated to be up over $8 million. If they trade for Garrett or Hendrickson, you would expect then a contract extension to happen where they could defer a bunch of that money so it doesn't cut too much into their cap for 2025. The same goes for Godwin. Light and Greeny will figure out that part of the deals as they have every other year, and they have become absolute masters at it. However, would it make more sense to sign players like Greenlaw and Young rather than trade for Garrett and Hendrickson? here's where things get a little sticky. Young is not going to come in and get you Garrett or Hendrickson level sacks. He helps, but it's honestly not a huge upgrade over Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. In that particular situation, Yaya Diaby is firmly planted as your number one edge rusher. And maybe with other upgrades around him at the linebacker position, bringing in somebody else on edge, beefing up the secondary, maybe he does hit that double-digit sack number, but you're not making the kind of splash that fans are hoping for, which, again, isn't always the most important thing, but you're also not impacting the defense the way you truly need to in order to raise the tier of team that you currently are. Dre Greenlaw, yes, love him, bring him in. If he can bounce back from a down year last season, you are in great shape at linebacker. You could switch out Young, though, in this situation. You could sign Greenlaw and Ward or Greenlaw and Douglas. So now you get your linebacker in your corner. Then you're going with Nick Scourton or Shamar Stewart at edge rusher, since you're probably not getting Mike Green without trading up. And if you're going to pay that draft day price to jump up to where Green is going to be taking, you're talking about moving up into the single digits. As far as moving from 19, you have Carolina and New Orleans there at 8 and 9. They're not going to be too eager to make a deal with you. So now you're talking about jumping up to 7 in order to get him. If you're going to pay that, you might as well pay what it's going to cost for Myles Garrett, because he's a proven commodity, and jumping up 12 spots in the draft is going to be a hefty, hefty price tag. And you're going to look at it and you're going to say, well, we might as well have spent that much draft capital to go get Myles Garrett. You can hope that Stewart or Scourton turn into Garrett or turn into Hendrickson, or you can just go get those guys for what it would cost to move up to get Mike Green. My preference, my ideal offseason for the Buccaneers, you sign Godwin to a deal, 3 or 4 years. You sign Lavonte David back on a 1-year deal, since he's taking it 1 year at a time. You sign Bredesen to a 2 or 3 year deal. That's when you trade for Hendrickson or Joey Bosa. And that is not a name that I've talked about on here as of now. I've had some insiders reach out to me about it, but it's starting to sound like Joey Bosa is going to be a cap casualty out in Los Angeles. You flip the Chargers a pick or two and secure him, and then sign him to an extension in order to restructure the astronomical cap hit that he would have, then you have Bosa for the next 2, 3, 4 years. You sign Greenlaw to a 1 or 2 year deal with a low guarantee, but rich in incentives to see if he really will bounce back to form. Then you sign a corner on a team-friendly deal that can compete with whoever you're drafting at corner for that starting spot. And regardless of who wins that battle, you're going to give yourself some depth. Players like Asante Samuel Jr., Jeff Okudah, Mike Hughes, guys that have starting experience, but they're not going to break the bank. You're talking about probably $5 million a year at most for any of those 3 players. After that, now you go into the draft still wanting to draft corner, safety, linebacker, and edge. But now you're not pigeonholed into forcing the pick of any specific position at number 19. Jahad Campbell, Mike Green, Nick Scourton, Will Johnson. If one of those guys falls to you, you take him. You want to see if Benjamin Morrison is going to fall to you in the second round? Go ahead and wait it out, because you already have corner figured out if you don't get a starting caliber guy. If not, if he doesn't fall to the second round, maybe you're looking at safety Xavier Watts. You're looking at corner Darian Porter, linebacker Demetrius Knight, edge rusher Jack Sawyer. You can build out your needs with the best player available at that position of need, rather than forcing any specific position. That's what is best, for this team. And it's honestly what the best and the most successful teams in the NFL do on a regular basis. Jason Light has been phenomenal over the last few years with that strategy, and especially finding those day 3 guys that come in and contribute. Bucky Irving obviously is going to jump to mind when you talk about day 3 guys in recent history. All of that said, if Godwin walks, you have to add receiver to the list of needs. Whether that's in the draft or in free agency, you have to find someone that's going to fill that role. I'm not too confident that Rakim Jarrett or Trey Palmer are going to get it done. Sterling Shepard was okay, but he is not reliable enough to fill that Godwin role. So regardless of which way the Godwin domino falls, that is going to shape the rest of the offseason as far as free agency and the draft will go for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Daniel Jeremiah obviously believes that Godwin is not returning. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine those live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I've missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. The Boston Celtics are the favorites to win the NBA Finals at plus 175, followed by the Oklahoma City Thunder at plus 200, and then the Cleveland Cavaliers at plus 900. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. The new Locked On NFL is here, and it's 2 shows every day. You got the Madman Tyler Rowland kicking off your morning. Then you can stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts, and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make it your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. In Daniel Jeremiah's second mock draft, he had the Bucs focusing on replacing Chris Godwin and ignoring the other more glaring needs on the team, namely edge rusher, linebacker, corner. Instead, Jeremiah paired the Bucs with Arizona receiver Tatoria McMillan, or maybe it's Tataroa McMillan. I'll find out the pronunciation next week. I couldn't find a legit pronunciation, but McMillan from Arizona. And when you look at the measurables, it sounds great. 6'5", 210, finished with 213 receptions, over 3,400 yards, and 26 touchdowns in his time with the Wildcats. Jeremiah's explanation said, quote, McMillan could go earlier in round 1, but Tampa Bay would be a perfect landing spot. Chris Godwin is due to become a free agent, and Mike Evans can't play forever, can he? End quote. Okay, I get that. But players that DJ passed over were Shamar Stewart, Jahad Campbell, Nick Scourton, Darius Alexander, and my guy Benjamin Morrison. Now, full disclosure, you guys know that he's my 2025 draft crush for the Buccaneers. He's not showing up in a lot of first-round mock drafts right now. That is going to change, I promise you. So don't go after me in the comments or on Twitter saying, James, why do you keep talking about Benjamin Morrison? He's not even going to be a first-round pick. Yes, he will. If he is working out in Indianapolis next week or participating in Notre Dame's Pro Day, he is going to get back into the first round. He was one of the best corners in college football in 2023, and he was one of the best corners in college football before he went down with injury in 2024. All that said, this mock draft does not make any sense to me. I get that you're planning for the future with Evans getting older. I get that Godwin might be leaving, but this isn't a move the Bucs make if they truly believe that they are competing for a Super Bowl in the next 2 years. This is a luxury pick. I'm not saying that the Bucs do not need a receiver. They do. Whether Godwin comes back or not, I would love to see the Bucs draft a wide receiver, but not in the first 2 days. That is a day 3 pick. I'm talking 5th round at the earliest. Maybe if you trade back in one of these rounds and you can pick up a 6th rounder, that's when you spend that on a wide receiver. You have to load up on defense. In fact, I would be elated. I would be dancing on this show if the Bucs finish draft weekend with only drafting defensive players. They do a great job of finding gems in undrafted free agency. And for what you need on the offensive side, you can find a wide receiver in undrafted free agency. That's where they found Rakim Jarrett. You can find depth along the offensive line in undrafted free agency. You can find depth at offensive line in regular free agency when you're not spending exorbitant amount of money in order to just have a guy that can come in if you need him to. You can get away with all of that this year. This is a move that you make with 2028 in mind, not 2025, not 2026. So as much as I love Daniel Jeremiah's takes, his draft acumen, this is the kind of pick that would have me shooting fire from my eye sockets on a live show on draft night after the first round is over with. The only way that I could see justification in making this kind of pick at 19 is if Godwin walked first and foremost. But then Jason Light goes out and he gets Garrett or Bosa or Hendrickson. He gets Dre Greenlaw, and then he gets Charvarius Ward. I don't think all of those things are going to happen. So if Godwin walks, don't forget, he is leaving the Bucs with nearly $19 million in dead cap. I realize that I just said not 5 minutes ago that I'm not too worried about the money. But 19 in dead cap is a lot to overcome if you're going to go out and get an elite edge rusher, a starting linebacker, and a starting corner. Those things are actually easier to do if you bring Godwin back, because the Bucs can take some of that dead money that triggers when the contract voids, and they can kick it down the road again. So that dead cap is a detriment. You are better off financially giving Godwin $22 million a year, $24 million a year, than you are letting him walk and having to deal with that $19 million this year. There's going to be a lot of news and a lot of hype coming out of Indianapolis next week. I plan on talking to as many of these corners and safeties and edge rushers and linebackers as I possibly can. But things are going to start shifting. And all of a sudden, you are going to see hype for day 2 guys getting pushed into day 1. Unlike other years, that very well could come to fruition rather than just being media hype this time around. There are not a lot of first-round grades in this class. However, you are going to see guys with 2nd and 3rd round grades going in the 4th and 5th rounds. You are going to have quality starters drafted at the top 2 rounds of day 3. It's just a lack of elite prospects compared to recent years. So it's no disrespect to McMillan. You know, I'm sure he's a great dude. He's going to have a really good career as a receiver in the NFL. But if the Bucs take him at 19 without having addressed the defensive issues that I just laid out in a very serious way by going out and getting those marquee players that I just mentioned, I am going to have to call Ross, host of Locked On Saints, my boss on this show, and I am going to have to seek out permission to do an uncensored show and let it fly, because I will be furious. Draft a wide receiver in round 5. Draft one in round 6 if you can pick up a 6-rounder. Draft one with your last pick in the draft. Do not take one at 19. There are far too many glaringly obvious needs on the defensive side of the ball at multiple positions where you are going to have a guy that you can have for the next 10 years at one of those positions at pick 19. Whether that's a corner or a linebacker or an edge rusher or a safety or whoever. That's what you focus on in round 1, in round 2, in round 3, and probably in round 4. This is not the year that you take a wide receiver in the first round. It's just not. Whether Godwin comes back or not, this isn't the year unless you're going to make those big boy moves for one of those edge rushers in a trade, and then you're signing Greenlaw and then Charvarius Ward or Rasul Douglas. You're going to have to spend mega money in free agency to bring those guys in. I just don't see them doing all of that. I see them doing one or two of those. Trade for the edge rusher, sign a linebacker. Sign a linebacker, sign a corner. Trade for an edge rusher, sign a safety. Those are the kinds of moves that I see happening. They're not going to do all of it in free agency to allow justification for taking a wide receiver at number 19. Speaking of next week, I have a combine preview for you, and the Bucs make some coaching changes. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here on the Locked On Bucs podcast, and the scouting combine, the true start of draft season. I'm super excited for it, and I'm excited to have boots on the ground over there to bring you guys some exclusive coverage. But what can you expect next week? For starters, you're going to start getting a lot of league-wide news as far as likely releases. You might get some contract extensions happening. You might get some players that are getting ready to hit free agency, signing deals with their current team so they don't hit free agency. You're going to hear about a franchise tag or two. This is where free agency really starts to take shape. It bubbles at the Senior Bowl, but it really grows at the Combine. You have a lot of coaches, executives out there together, along with player agents, and conversations are going to happen. So there's likely going to be a steady stream of news all week long. As far as the Bucs are concerned, Jason Light and Todd Bowles will be at the podium on Tuesday because, of course they are, because I can't be there until Wednesday. But Evan and I will have plenty of reaction to their comments on Wednesday's episode when Evan and I sit down Tuesday evening. But you're gonna hear from them, and I'm sure there will be 800 different questions about the same things. Chris Godwin, Ben Bredeson, Baker Mayfield, making a trade for Garrett or Hendrickson or another player, which Jason or Todd will not comment on because they're currently under contract with another team. And you can't talk about players under contract with another team. So you'll get something to the effect of, we're exploring all options. That'll be the gist of it. But then you're going to hear about Levante. You're going to hear about Jordan Whitehead. Those are going to be the main topics. As for the prospects, the workouts are going to be broadcast on NFL Network like they always are. Defensive linemen and linebackers, they are going to speak to us on Wednesday. Their workouts are Thursday for you to be able to watch. Defensive backs, so your corners, your safeties, and then tight ends, they're going to speak to us on Thursday. You're going to get to watch them on Friday. Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, they speak on Friday. You're going to get to see them all work out on Saturday. And then finally, offensive linemen speak on Saturday. They are going to have their workouts on Sunday. So I'm going to be very, very busy on Wednesday and Thursday. Friday, I can be a little more selective. I can go and talk to some of these late round wide receiver prospects. I can talk to a running back or two that might fall to the later rounds or go undrafted. Quarterbacks, I don't know. Maybe they take one. I would be willing to bet they sign a veteran backup. Kyle Trask will probably leave. Don't be surprised if Kyle Trask goes to Jacksonville and helps bring Trevor Lawrence along as far as learning Cohen's offense. That seems like a logical fit to me. And Trevor Lawrence gets hurt more than Baker does, so Trask will actually have an opportunity to play in some NFL games. But definitely a heavy focus for you guys for this show on edge rushers, linebackers, corners, safeties, defensive linemen. That's where my focus is going to be. I will keep you all dialed in as much as possible. Lots of texting with the insiders while I am out in Indianapolis. And don't worry, everyone, I'll make sure to tell David that you all said hi. Last quick thing before I send you into the weekend, the Bucs made some coaching changes official on Friday. Mike Caldwell is returning to the staff as inside linebackers coach. Caldwell spent last season in Vegas with the Raiders as the run game coordinator and linebackers coach. He was with Jacksonville the 2 years before that as defensive coordinator. And then, of course, Caldwell was with the Bucs as their inside linebackers coach from 2019 to 2021. During his tenure, both Lavonte David and Devin White received second-team All-Pro nods, and Devin White went to the Pro Bowl. Now, as a result of Caldwell's return, Larry Foote has moved back to outside linebackers coach, which is where he was during the Super Bowl season. So maybe the Caldwell-Foote combination, back together again as the outside and inside linebackers coaches are going to help get things back on track in both of those areas. Other changes: Charlie Strong was officially announced as defensive line coach, while Kefense Hinson, my apologies to Coach Hinson, I kept pronouncing his name Kefense or Kefense. It's Kefensa. Kefense Hinson was officially announced as pass game coordinator. Other moves among the staff: Kevin Carberry is now run game coordinator and offensive line coach. George Edwards is pass game coordinator. Jeff Castile is assistant tight ends coach. And Brian Picucci is an offensive line coach. That is going to do it for today's show. We will have a mock draft Monday coming up to start the week. I think this time around, unless you guys have any suggestions, I am fully open to those. But I think I'm going to do dueling mock drafts to drive home the point that I made earlier that was basically approached from my buddy Anand, who had DM'd me to start off this show. And I'm going to do dueling mock drafts where in one, I am going to force taking an edge rusher at 19 versus a mock draft where I take the best player available at a position of need. In full disclosure, when I say best player available on this show, this is something David and I have talked about every single year, and it stays true. But for those of you that are new, don't know how things used to be around here, when I refer to best player available, that means the best player available at a position that the Buccaneers need. That does not mean, at 19, they should take Ashton Genty, because Genty would probably be the best player on the board at 19. They don't need him. They need defense. A best player available in the second round, if it's a quarterback, the Bucs are not going to take a quarterback in the second round. So anytime I refer to best player available, that's what I mean, at a position of need for the Bucs. So I'll do a mock where I force myself to take an edge rusher at 19. I'll do a mock draft where I take the best player available just to see how both of those drafts fully shake out after the full 7 rounds. In the meantime, please check out everything on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs. Make sure that you are subscribed and following on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to give being an insider a shot, now is the right time. Lots of conversation will be coming from me out in Indianapolis. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.